Word Balloon is brought to you by the League of Word Balloon Listeners. All right, a couple little technical difficulties there, but I think we're okay now. My video might be a little slower than my audio. That's what Tim told me. But welcome back to Word Balloon, everybody. It's John Suntress, and I'm happy to welcome Tim Hanley back, author, comic historian. Tim, good to see you.
Good to see you. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, my pleasure, man. We've talked in the past. Has it been twice, Tim? Because I know we talked about the Wonder Woman book. I thought we talked about the Lois Lane book, too.
I think it was just the Wonder Woman book, and then I was working on the Lois Lane book, so I think we talked a little Lois in that conversation, too.
That makes sense. All right. So, yes, such past books, everybody, as Wonder Woman Unbound, The Curious History of the World's Most Famous Heroine, and the Lois Lane book, of course, The Turbulent History of the Daily Planet's Ace Reporter. And then 2 years ago, was it for the Betty and Veronica book?
Yeah, 2 years ago.
There you go. The Leading Ladies of Riverdale. And, of course, then the curious many lives of Catwoman, the felonious history of a femme fatale indeed. And now we got the brand new book, and this one's an interesting one. It's not all Supermen. Sexism, toxic masculinity, and the complete history of superheroes. And this goes through the decades, right from, the start of the superhero craze in the late 30s all the way to the modern era. And it's a great reaccount of the basic comic book history. But there's and I hear what you're saying in this thesis, Tim, and I'll let you explain it. But essentially, I mean, based on the title, obviously, you have felt that certainly looking at the totality of comic book history, that male-dominated superheroes, as you say, toxic masculinity, not always the best examples, maybe in a fair society. But please, in your own words, what would you say the thrust of your book is?
Yeah, so the idea is the book is that sexism has been a part of the superhero industry from the beginning. Understandably from the beginning, because it started in the late 1930s when everything was sexist.
Yeah.
But these stories laid the foundation for the genre, and we kind of hold them up as these icons we need to follow. And as much as there's a ton of good stuff in these early stories, like fighting fascism and standing up for the oppressed, a lot of the other elements carry on as well, and we kind of just let them linger, and in certain cases fester and grow over the decades into more unpleasant things, where we start to see toxic masculinity in the comics itself, and certainly within the fandom as well.
Well, yeah. Oh, pardon me. Please finish, Tim. I don't want to.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say I agree with you in terms of certainly the culture wars have ramped up in the last 6 or 7 years, and the changes that have happened in political society has allowed, I think, a very negative vibe. And it's sad, because I really did feel for the longest time, despite our history, I really felt like, and still do, that things are moving in the right direction. And I do think there is more diversity, inclusivity. But that said, yeah, there is kind of a very angry, negative vibe in the comic world. Comicsgate represents it, certainly, and that's unfortunate. But I would say, despite the totality of our history, would you at least agree that in the last, I would say, 10 to almost 15 years, things have vastly improved?
Oh yeah, things have definitely got better. I have some charts in the book just on sheer creator numbers. So how many men, how many women are writing and drawing the books, and you can see in the last 15 years the numbers start to grow quite a fair bit. The thing is, though, like the 70, 75 years before that, the numbers are this for everyone else. And as much as we're starting to move beyond things, and that's fantastic, the industry does have all of that baggage behind it. And kind of the way the genre works, the way it's so based in nostalgia and stuff, we still rely on all these stories and draw from all these stories that were, written, drawn, edited almost exclusively by straight men with a very narrow perspective. So yeah, we're making strides, but we have a lot of history to reckon with as we continue to move forward.
Well, I agree with that, but I also think that, and truly, it's being handled by not only straight white men, but also males of other colors and other orientations, but also women of color and other orientations as well, and white women. That everyone, I think, or a lot of the current actors are taking the tropes of the past and putting a modern spin on them, and not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, if you understand the
Yeah,
metaphor, and I'm
exactly.
sure you do.
Yeah.
And that's good. I mean, and that's, I guess, because again, I do think it's fair to point out the bad things that did happen alongside the good things of the comic book history. But I was your final statements in your final chapter are like, well, we'll see what happens. And maybe I'm glass half full, but I'm like, I think I really think everyone is trying to make it better, and that yes, we do have that angry Comicsgate and others that won't accept change and don't like to see more women heroes or whatever, and we just want comics the way they used to be. And I just think that's too much of a blanket statement on the right, but also that again, I think they're a minority.
Yeah, it's I think in the terms of creators, absolutely. In terms of like DC and Marvel are owned by massive corporations who have to be dragged kicking, screaming into this sort of thing.
Yeah.
Like we're not necessarily, we've not closed the door on all the sexism of the past, and there may be more in the future, because as much as everyone's doing their best and so many great creators are just telling so many great stories now, if the culture starts to shift, the corporations will go with it. And even just in the history of comics itself, you can see like there've been moments where representation was a little better, the stories get a little different, a little broader, and then it kind of something happens and snaps back. If you look at the same when Marvel went bankrupt in the mid 90s, their creator numbers is just one metric were remarkably high before that. But as soon as things go bad, we got to go back to the core audience. We got to go back to appealing to like young straight men. It's all men writing and drawing the books. So it's for right now, things are going well. I'm very glad for it. My ability to trust in it to stay this way forever is a little shakier. Hopefully, we'll see. But you can't trust a corporation. Is the long and short of it, I think.
Well, I absolutely hear you. I'm always telling my my young nephews who are now in their 20s, and sometimes I always feel, and again, this is maybe my old man approach, but that they are susceptible to a lot of corporate messages. And having grown up in the 70s, especially, those were my formative years. I was born in '64, so 10 through 20 was '74 through '84, and I'm like, no, don't trust the man. I'm like, the man is going to sell you a bill of goods.
Yeah.
Stop believing what they're spewing commercially, and always be questioning. And I think it's fair to question, but I don't know, man. I guess again, I really feel like both DC and Marvel, as the leaders of the superhero world, I think truly after the exposure of a lot of harassment, and I'm glad that women and people of color stood up and said this is wrong and it needs to change. And I do think that they have been. And I mean, nobody's perfect, and we'll get the occasional misstep, but I do really believe that there's a sincere effort for more inclusion and more diversity, again, sexually orientation, people of color. And I really, and I mean, good Lord, I mean, we're in the midst of, or I suppose we're at the end of Pride Month. This is the last day of Pride Month. But, I mean, I think they're really doing everything they can to be open to that. And again, I see more creators of color. Of course, there's definitely more work to be done. But
Yeah.
not only that, would you also agree? And what I didn't see in the book was beyond image. I really feel like the other publishers are really making a sincere effort, not just in superhero stuff, but really the way that all the other genres have exploded. and that they are catering to these other audiences and saying, yeah, it isn't just a straight white guy's comic book world.
Yeah, definitely. The book is about superheroes specifically, so it's really DC and Marvel heavy, and then a little bit of Image when that kicks up in
I'm with you.
the 90s. But yeah, for sure, other genres, other publishers have made huge strides, and I think that's a lot of the reasons we've seen strides within the superhero genre. Like things, manga blew up in the early 2000s, and you've got all the Vertigo stuff that brings in a new audience, and I think that's really helped expand both fandom and creators and kind of show that other approaches, other viewpoints can work and can be woven into superhero media to make it more inclusive as well.
Would you also say like a company like Valiant coming up with their character Faith, who was anti body shaming and I think a very positive and again a superhero
Yeah,
that presented. And did you acknowledge Faith in your book? Forgive me if you did. And I
yeah.
missed it.
Faith is in there. I think a paragraph. There's going to
Okay.
be more, but there is going to be so much more in this book. This book could be 10 times as long with all the
No, I
stuff we could
understand.
cover. But
Well, go on.
yeah, a great moment, and obviously, just in terms of the way female bodies have been depicted in comics for the 75 years before Faith, what a big leap forward, and it's definitely led to
Yeah.
more change throughout the industry.
Yeah, and also the other thing, and you said it earlier, and I think you're right. It wasn't just comics; it really was society in general,
Yeah,
and a lot. I mean, good Lord, comics have always been a lens of what's happening in pop culture,
absolutely.
and yeah, and I think for all the good and all the bad as well. I mean, I hear what you're saying about again some of the missteps of the past, but again they were societal, and certainly they are represented in the comic book genre. But one thing that did surprise me was, and I hear what you're saying, that certainly the classic trope, and again we point to even your books like the Lois Lane book, where Lois started. There were negative things, and obviously the damsel in distress, and Superman needed to save her. But I also felt like, and actually I can even throw Catwoman in there as well. That two things. One, you said that Joe Shuster really leaned on kind of a type, model type, and everything as far as how he depicted women in comics. The Superman co-creator, the artist, but I don't know, man. I always felt too that really was just endemic of the way men were illustrating women. Yes, they were. It was dominated by men. Of course, we did have the exceptions. Did you mention Matt Baker? Matt Baker's a great Golden Age artist, a gentleman of color
Yeah,
that certainly was a great cheesecake artist. That's another thing too. Let's forgive me, but it does kind of fly in that same area of again, women, and yes, mostly beautiful women with model looks and model figures. That was just kind of the norm.
yeah. But I think it speaks to how the creators approach the characters. So, say Joe Shuster, for example,
Yeah,
with Lois Lane, it's based on this model he knew that he very quickly fell in love with, who married Jerry Siegel and created a lot of
yeah,
drama for the both of them.
yeah,
But so Lois Lane was a version of someone he wanted to be with, a sort of sexual fantasy, if you will. Whereas
yeah.
Superman is who he wanted to be. It's like a power fantasy.
Hundred
And
percent.
so the entire genre, until very recently, has been based on that dynamic. Men have been power fantasies. It's what the creators want to do, their kind of ideals. And then the women have not have been limited to this is what we want to look at, this is what we find desirable. Their kind of traits beyond that have been secondary, whereas the powerful traits have been at the fore for male heroes for the bulk of the superhero industry's time.
Well, again, I really do think that the last, I think the last 20 years, slowly, but really, especially the last 10 years,
Yeah.
I really do think a lot of the publishers are getting the message and are working very hard to take those ideals. Hell, man, and I know I'm preaching to the choir saying this as well, and I'm sure you felt the same way. I mean, to have taken so long since the 70s to get another Lois Lane solo book
Yeah.
was ridiculous. And then even then, and listen, I think Greg Rucka is a very sensitive writer. He's a good friend. I won't deny that. And I think he did as did Brian Bendis. I thought they had very strong portrayals of Lois as an equal partner to Superman and a very capable reporter. And I love that, boom, right there on your cover. You certainly cover all that. But even prior to that, and it's funny because I hear what you're saying, that um, they were brief moments prior to, I would say, the last 20 years. I mean, but especially in the case of Lois, John Byrne certainly reasserted her importance as an investigative reporter.
Yep.
And I don't know, man. I like I said, I mean, they're glimpses, and certainly then, for whatever reasons, they would go back. I mean, probably as well as I do, the Lois Lane solo book that started in the 50s because of the Superman television show.
Yep.
I remember as a little kid when Lois suddenly became very independent and was like, I don't need you to save me. I've got stuff to do. I'm not going to be always waiting for you whenever, as you point out in your book, between missions.
Yeah.
I've got my own life to lead. And I really do think it's only gotten better for Lois. And truly, I think she is the most powerful non-powered person in superhero comic books.
Oh, you're preaching to the choir when it comes to Lois Lane. I love Lois Lane. But like that era when she stands up to Superman is like after 100 issues of her trying to marry Superman every issue, crying when he wouldn't, putting herself in danger just so he'd come save him. And the entire like Women's Live Lois era last 7 issues, and then they fire the female editor behind the book unceremoniously, and it's back to the same old thing. So I think when you said glimpses, I think you really nailed it on the head. There are great moments in comics history for women, and even just like the point of the book is that superhero comics are bad. I love superhero comics. I think the values in them are so great. It's just there's all this other stuff attached to it that we have carried on for so long and kind of established as sort of the background noise of the genre that we don't even really notice because we're used to it. And the point of the book is let's try to notice it even more and keep all the great stuff and get rid of the stuff we don't need anymore.
What would be modern examples? Do you feel there are currently, as far as what the publishers are giving us, that underlines that you feel this is still a problem?
Oh, still a problem.
Well, yeah. Unless you don't, and if you don't, that's great. But I wonder what is your current opinion of, the output?
Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff now. The books have gotten really good, especially with female characters. They seem to have learned, have some diverse voices on the book, kind of listen to the fans a little bit more. We've seen a little bit of 2 steps forward, 1 step back. You got, like, say, Batgirl Burnside was a big development, like cool, fun costume. And then I think after that run ended, we went back to like the tighter, super tight costume, classic Batgirl look. So just in terms of like a costuming sense, that's sort of a step back for the character. The writing was still quite strong. Or even like Burnside again got rid of the Killing Joke, which is it's a story I do not care for. But then DC brings it back for like 3 Jokers and the Joker War and all this other stuff. Like they can't quit the Killing Joke, which is this. Even the creators say this was not good. We should not have done this book. So it's this kind of adherence to these stories from the past that are terrible for female characters, terrible in terms of just sexism and all of. Like for the example in the Killing Joke, for those who haven't read it, like Batgirl is paralyzed at the start of the book and then ignored for the entirety of the rest of the book, apart from when nude photographs are shown of her to taunt Commissioner Gordon.
Yes.
And then it's just Batman and Joker, and they end the book with a laugh, and you never hear of Batgirl or Barbara for the rest of the book. And that's canon, and we keep trying to move away from it, and they keep bringing it back instead of letting her escape the trauma of all of that, even though it's been dealt with very well. Gail Simone did it quite beautifully.
I'm with you on Gail. I will say, though, in the Joker War, if I remember correctly, it was Cecil Castellucci that was writing Batgirl back then. that they, again, what I liked about it is they revisited it and they made Barbara much stronger, and I really felt like they that she really, like, if anything, came at him and really tried to,
Yeah,
had not tried, did kick his ass, and it's like, and that's why I think it is good. I mean, you're absolutely right about the Killing Joke. That was 35 years ago,
yeah.
and it is part of canon. You're right. They have softened it a bit.
It's
That
a chosen part of canon too, though. Like we've rebooted twice since then. We could
You're right.
get rid of it. And as much as the Joker War stuff with Cecil Castellucci was great, you get Heroes in Crisis with like Clay Mann drawing it, and the art is like super tight uniform, Batgirl lifting up her shirt to show the scar. And then I think in Three Jokers with, was it Fabok that did Three Jokers?
Fabok did do Three Jokers, yes.
Yeah, the scar is like we see it in the shower scene. So it's the story that continues, and then how we are showing it. It's as much as Cecil did a great job with it, there's been other things that are not so thoughtful.
Well, and I hear what you're saying. I do think, especially when it comes to, if you want to call it exploitive nudity, and those are my words. Forgive me if I'm mischaracterizing your point, but I will say that I do think, for instance, Nightwing is quite exploited in the same vein of being beefcake, and I will not deny. And these are my words, everybody. This is not Tim talking. This is John talking. Because I'm going to say something that sometimes I will see feminists complain that, wow, that looks too cheesecakey and stuff. The same women will also go, ooh, Nightwing's butt, because the artists that Seeley and then Tom King, when they were doing the Grayson book or other books and stuff, it's like, hey man, Dick Grayson's a boy toy and just as exploited for his good looks as any female superhero. And I guess there are more examples of the women's one, certainly when you go into the history of a character. But again, I do think it's becoming a more even playing field. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think the difference is Nightwing hasn't been, to use your words, exploited in this way for 80 years. And like this turn towards the female gaze that we're seeing with Nightwing and like a few other male characters is a big change for the industry. Whereas Batgirl, Wonder Woman, every female character has been shown in this way for decades and decades and decades. So at this current moment, are things a little more level? Yes. Is there a
Okay.
massive history behind how we've shown men and women in this industry that is leading towards one direction? Extremely so.
I totally hear what you're saying. Good Lord, there are so many societal errors that you can point to and say, well, in 200 years, if you really do the totality of American history, 200 plus years, there certainly are a lot of bad. Goddamn, now that I think about it, Christ, we're almost at 100 or 250 years. Good Lord.
Yeah, soon, right?
That's how old I am. Yeah, I forget sometimes. But no, it's yeah, you can't, it's you can't deny, if it's in baseball terms of years of wrong behavior compared to the most recent history of better behavior. No, comics won't win. Society won't win, though, too. And that's why it's like, I get what you're saying, but I also worry that I think um, what is happening currently, all they can do is try to make it better.
Yeah.
And I think you could do that without ejecting everything about the bad decades.
Yeah, absolutely. There's
Okay.
in every decade, there's things of value. There's great stories. There's even a lot of the stories where I talk about things and critique them quite strongly. Every story has something of value to it. Like there's so many amazing artists, so many amazing writers that have done a lot of things. It's just they're products of their time. We've allowed for bulk of the history, for the canon, for the ways we've drawn these people, the stories we've told, to continue whole cloth. So my thesis is keep all the great stuff, and the stuff we don't need, we can leave behind and continue to move beyond.
I do think sometimes too, the efforts to broaden ideas during the 70s, women's lib, ERA, all those things, I think they were sincere efforts to open things up. But I think ultimately too, they did fall back on looking at sales numbers, and sadly, a lot of those efforts stop. And again, maybe the sales. I mean, would you agree that maybe it was sales that obviously?
Yeah, for sure. I
Okay.
mean, by the early 1970s, superhero comics had like established a primarily male audience at that point. Like if you go back to the 40s, everyone read superhero comics.
You bet.
And then kind of over the 50s, you see the bifurcation. And then when superheroes really come back in the late 50s after the comics code and everything, superheroes are for boys. I have a bit in the book that's a look at letter columns, and you can kind of see just based on the letter columns what the
Yeah.
audience is. And with DC, who's established, you can kind of see in the early 60s, it's still majority boys, but it starts at like 70-ish% and then grows and grows up into I think it's high 80s by the end of the decade. Whereas Marvel, which is starting whole cloth basically in the early 1960s, it's like 85-90% male fans of letter columns from the get-go. So that's who they're selling to. That's who they're catering to. Some of the attempts did not last long. Lois Lane's feminist era lasted 7 years, or 7 issues, sorry. Wonder Woman's connection with Gloria Steinem, that was supposed to be a new feminist era for Wonder Woman, never actually happened. Barbara Gordon became a congresswoman. That was pretty cool, but then disappeared after that. And you get that Marvel, you get it's Patsy Walker, but it's the Cat,
Right.
and Shannon the She-Devil and Night Nurse. They're kind of 3 big books in the early 70s, written and drawn by women. Huge change for Marvel. They all last about 4 issues and just stop. So it could be a sales thing, but I mean, after 4 issues, that's a quick yank. And
I'm with you. Yeah.
And when they try Ms. Marvel a bit later, an overtly feminist character from the get-go, based clearly on Gloria Steinem.
Yep.
It starts strong with like very clear feminist messaging. She has to argue with J. Jonah Jameson to get equal pay at the Daily Bugle. Her magazine is like under the arch of the Daily Bugle, which is makes for some great scenes. But then within a few issues, you get some letters that are like, this is great, we love it. You get other letters that are like, this is too much, you have to tone it down. And the editors seem to immediately side with tone it down and cut down the feminist rhetoric, kind of change your outfit to be skimpier, change the tone of the book, and the feminism quickly disappears. And then the sales disappear soon after that. So as much as they did try, they did not. Sales certainly would have played a role in it, but I don't think they gave it as big of a push in terms of strongly supporting the feminist aspects of the character as they could have.
Well, I mean, but also if the company's research tells them that a certain audience really is paying attention to this stuff, how much should a publisher try to do cast a wider net? I don't know. Again, I'm glad I didn't have to make that decision back in the day. I really don't think. I don't know. I don't know if again the fact that they weren't making the product obviously probably turned away a lot of women, and maybe that is the case. It likely is. But again, it was it's that thing. Hey, you got to play the hits. I mean, if you're only again, if your sellers are really only men, I kind of get both sides. I hate to say that because anytime I hear both sides, I think of our former president, and I'm like, no, that's not what I mean. But I am sure you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah, I would say, especially for the 70s, in the book, I quote Stanley's introduction to a hardcover. I think it's called The Superhero Women. That's like a collection of
I remember that collection fondly. Yes,
greatest stories of female superheroes, and like it's characters that appeal to like once. It's just the bench is not deep, and Stanley in the introduction thinks they have done an amazing job. Like the suggestion of sexism, he raises it that some people say the books are sexist. He says, no way, not at all. Could not possibly be us. We would never do a sexist book ever. Like when future histories are written, they're going to look back and say Marvel led the way for female characters, and boy, they sure did not.
Ha! You are not wrong. And again, I think, I think they were blinded by the decades again of I think just this is the way women are portrayed, and so be it. I mean, good Lord, you're right, especially in the infancy of the Silver Age. God, I remember, I do remember one issue of the Fantastic Four where the postman comes in with Marvel fan letters. And I don't
Yeah,
know if you talked about this in the book. I forgive me if I missed it,
where Sue
but
gets sad because everyone thinks she shouldn't be on the team.
yep,
Yeah,
yep. And
it's such a funny.
Reed really like leans in. Hey, she's great. Remember when she saved us that one time? And
That's not what
like,
he says. He
tell me what he
says,
says, please, please, Tim.
because this is great. He says, Sue is obviously not as strong as the rest of it, but she's a wonderful inspiration for us all. And that's why she's important to the team. It's like he talks about Abraham Lincoln's mother, how Abraham Lincoln's mother never fought in the Civil War, but what an inspiration to Abraham Lincoln she was.
Wow.
And that's about it. It's not Sue did all this great stuff because in all the issues before, she did not. She
Well,
turned
they did.
invisible and got captured.
I was going to say though, they did show her when Doctor Doom had all three of the men captured. She's the one that broke them out. I do remember that vividly from that story because it was in the Treasury
Yeah.
reprint as Fantastic Four book and everything.
Every now and again, they let her do something. But yeah, that letters issue is great. And it's very much, she is inspiration. But I think the next issue is when they meet the Hulk. And
Okay.
she's so terrified of the Hulk, she turns invisible. And she talks about how she's a terrible, terrible member of the team. She shouldn't be even on the team. And like Reed and General Ross are like, again, you're such a great inspiration, though, Sue. We're so glad to have you around. What a great gal.
No, you're right. And good Lord, I mean, people have pointed out, and you have it in the book as well, regarding the X-Men, that not only did all the male contemporaries, the team members, all had it bad for Marvel Girl, so did Professor X, which is really creepy.
Yep.
Because he's an old man and he is really like pining for Jean Grey, but it would never work because I'm in the chair. Yeah, how about that? You're like, a good 30 years older than her, sir.
That was every Marvel book too. Like Reed is way older than Sue.
Yeah.
Ant-Man is way older than the Wasp, and the Wasp looks like his dead wife. Like it is a common
really
motif.
was that? Hold on a minute. So Janet Van Dyne looked like Henry Pym's widow?
Yeah.
Or rather his dead wife. I don't remember that.
Yeah. So the Wasp's first appearance, Janet's dad is a scientist who gets killed under mysterious circumstances. So she goes to find his colleague Hank Pym to help. And as soon as he sees her, he's like, oh man, this young girl is a dead ringer for my wife. I need to be careful around this girl in case I fall in love with her because looks just like her. And that's kind of his approach for the next couple issues until, of course, they do fall in love.
Yes.
And that is also the only reason Janet wants to be a superhero is to be around Hank.
Yeah, again, sadly, 60s kind of thinking. Good Lord. Yeah. And again, you cover it very well in the book in the 50s when both, Wonder Woman and Lois, God, I mean, especially, listen, the 40s Wonder Woman is very weird. And Marston really was a very complex person, putting it mildly, and certainly had some very strong beliefs about empowering women. But by the same token, and as we've learned more and more about his private life, not a conventional life to say the least. And had his wife and had his young mistress living with them both, and there's that fantastic picture of him, his wife, and the mistress that obviously is seemingly accepted by the wife, and you see her bracelets that clearly inspired Wonder Woman's bracelets, and I don't think she was deflecting bullets with those bracelets. Have you seen that Marston movie? I still haven't seen it. I keep meaning to. That came out a few years ago because I am again just oddly fascinated by it as an amateur comic historian in terms of what the hell was going on in his mind,
Yeah, it's as a movie, it's enjoyable. I liked it as an accurate portrayal of the Marstons and kind of the nature of the relationship and even just the history of DC Comics and Wonder Woman generally. It's not very accurate.
It took a long time. Again, I really think what's been done in the last 20 years, I would point to, again, my friend Greg Rucka, certainly Gail Simone, and current writers of Wonder Woman. God, Historia. What do you think of
Story's
Historia?
so good. It's
Yeah,
amazing.
I'm with you, man. No, and I'm due to have Kelly Sue back to talk
Oh,
about it
nice.
with Shame on Me, the next artist, and damn it,
Oh,
he's winning.
Nicholas Scott.
Well, Nicola's doing part 3,
Yeah.
but part
Oh,
2
Gene
that
Ha.
yeah, Gene Ha, of course.
Yeah.
On me. Sorry, Gene. I love you, Gene. Gene's a local guy. I love Gene. But no, I really I've only done with Phil Jimenez, also another great not only Wonder Woman artist but writer as well.
Hmm.
That really understood the character and really brought out great ideas. Back in the 50s, good lord, that and again, it is sad that Dorothy Woolfolk was maybe trying to do the right thing. I want to get back to Wonder Woman in the 70s, but certainly Robert Kanigher in the 50s. Wonder Woman was Lois Lane in a red, white, and blue outfit, pining for Steve Trevor, and oh, I wish he would marry me. And
Yeah.
it really, it's, I mean, they hurt. They're bad stories. They really, really are bad stories.
They're tough. And you can tell Kanigher would rather be doing his war stories. Like Wonder Woman is an afterthought for him. You'll read one story and then like 3 years later, it's the exact same story. Like, oh, she's
Yes,
gone back in the past and met Robin Hood again for the third time in 6 years.
yeah, but and you know too, the thinking back then was the audience is constantly turning over.
Yeah.
We didn't have reprints back then. I'm always amazed how they kind of accidentally stumbled on the idea of, hey, maybe we can reprint this stuff. And also, even in it was funny. I wanted to show examples where I think one Lois Lane in particular was stronger during the Superman family run. But I have to confess, the early part of the Superman family run, they were just reprinting a lot of old Lois Lane solo books. And some of them were, yeah, you know, boy, I hope Superman marries me. Plus, they had Mr. and Mrs. Superman, where you had the Golden Age
Yeah.
Superman and Lois as man and wife. But I do know that once they did go back to original stories, I think Lois was very capable, and she was breaking up crime stories and solving mysteries as an investigative reporter. And I think it was, if not overtly feminist, certainly she was the hero of her own story. I would say the same thing about Supergirl as well in those Supergirl or Superman family comics, especially when they got in the dollar years, or I should say months before the DC implosion kind of got rid of all that.
Yeah, I think with Superman family, the way they had it set up was it was like Superman, Jimmy, Supergirl, Lois, and like one of them would have a new story each month, and then the other ones would get reprints. So like you get a new Lois story every 3 or 4 months, and they were good sometimes, less good others. It's always a crapshoot with these things. The
Sure.
Superman family stuff was decent, but then like say even relative to what we see with Margot Kidder around the same time, and what a badass Margot Kidder's Lois was. Not quite at that level, and even there's great stuff in the 1940s because Lois Lane is one of the few female characters to benefit from being attached to a male character. Superman is so popular that all of his supporting characters get to do more, like Jimmy Olsen blows up and Lois blows up.
Yep.
So Lois ends up having her own adventures, which is extremely rare for a female character in the 1940s. Outside of Wonder Woman, most of them don't last that long. So Lois, just by that association, gets to have these great moments. And yeah, like as we've discussed before, glimpses, there's these great bits and pieces every now and then where Lois gets to really shine. And then there's like stretches of years where she kind of fades into the background. In the main stories, say in the 1970s, while Lois is doing stuff in Superman family, Superman is dating Lois and Clark Kent is dating Lana Lang, and they get into a fight at the Daily Planet, and one of them pushes each other's face into a punch bowl. Like that's the sort of stuff in action in Superman comics. Well, Lois does have every 3 months a cool 10-page story.
I hear you. I hear you. Again, yeah, it's a shame. But there were moments. I read what you said about Alan Moore and Watchmen. And honestly, I felt you kind of gave short shrift to Silk Spectre, the modern Silk Spectre.
Sure.
That you said once she partnered with Night Owl, that her usefulness, and again, this is my interpretation, feel free to correct me, but that her usefulness kind of ended. I really felt like Laurie has a very interesting story, that especially starting in her mother's shadow, being dominated by Dr. Manhattan and the men in her life, coming to the insane realization that that the comedian is her father, and it's a very Elektra moment. And I don't mean the ninja assassin. I mean morning, the as
Yeah.
opposed to Oedipus, the Elektra story.
Yeah.
That I think is valid. And also, I noticed in Dave Gibbons. I've never asked Dave this. I should next time I talk to him. I love Dave. I think Alan Moore's brilliant. I think Dave Gibbons is brilliant. But I really felt like Laurie's face became very much like the comedian's face
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
in the last chapters of the Watchmen story, and that she is accepted begrudgingly. And again, I mean, God, I even talked to shame on me, the actress that played the Laurie in the Watchmen movie.
Oh yeah. Crap.
You know,
What is that?
yeah, great. She's in Billions as well. Fantastic.
Yeah.
And then the remake of The Heartbreak Kid. Shame on me, everybody. I apologize. And everyone's yelling at the podcast right now. Dummy, it's so and so. But anyway, yeah, I'm like, I know they didn't show much of it in the movie. She's like, oh no, I read it. And she goes, I tried to project that change as best as I could, but she's like, no, I'm very aware, and I find that an incredibly interesting wrinkle to her character. Oh God, shame on us. I can't believe I can't remember her name. Boy, what an asshole. Everybody, yeah, how you doing? Straight white guy, everybody. Can't remember the chick's name. Yeah, nice. Fantastic. Well, anyway, but everyone knows who we're talking about. But also, yeah, would you agree? Or I mean, again, I just think Laurie's trajectory in the story, like I said, I just kind of felt you gave it short shrift in your description of Watchmen.
I think, yeah, there's a degree of fairness to that. I mean, Alan Moore is a good writer. He's going to give every character an arc. I think in terms of the overall narrative of the story and her function within it, she starts as sort of a catalyst for Dr. Manhattan's story. And then once she leaves Dr. Manhattan's kind of sphere, she now becomes a catalyst for Night Owl's story. And like her own story, while interesting, is more a background story and not... I'm searching Silk Spectre while I talk to you to try to figure out this.
Oh, yeah, man, absolutely. No, I hope
it's not coming up.
Too.
But yeah, so she does have an arc, and it's definitely an interesting one. But I think just in terms of the larger story, she's there to spur the male characters more than anything else.
I'm with you. I'm looking at my phone as well, man. So you'll forgive me.
Yeah, it's gonna bug me the entire time.
I know. So let's. By the way, I thought Jean Smart in the HBO sequel. Holy shit, she was great.
Really. Malin Ackerman,
get a boy.
Yeah,
well
there
done.
We go.
I knew there was an M in her first name. Yes, and I was on the press junket for the movie when it was just coming out. Got to talk to the whole cast, talked to Snyder as well, talked to Dave, and yeah, I really felt she understood and really embraced it in terms of it, again, at least from a subtextual standpoint. I'll take her word for it because, again, she's like, I know exactly what you're talking about, and I think it's great because you don't want to there's this kind of weird Elektra thing. You only got 3 minutes with the woman, which is like, no, I know exactly what you're talking about. She's got a very complex relationship with her father. She said I tried to channel it. So, but that's fine and that's fair. And like I said, I hear what you're saying. I do hear what you're saying. I appreciate you, us doing the back and forth here too about because again,
yeah,
I think you're. I think a lot of your points are very valid. I guess, again, I just feel more optimistic that I really do think message received, especially, sadly, in the cases where we've had bad actors that were still hired by the two publishers that were working as recently as, within the last 10 years.
In the last 5 years.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I'll give you that as well. All right, sure. I don't remember the specific timeline. Shame on me for not. But yeah, I mean, and thank God for the women that stood up and said, this person has to go.
Yeah.
I mean, Eddie Berganza is an immediate, obvious tick, and rightfully so. I mean, it is kind of like, how the hell is this guy still got a job? From all the, stuff that at the time was rumor, but I was hearing these things and it's like, Jesus Christ. And I'm glad that it finally came out, and the guy got the boot. Yeah, and again, you point out several of those bad actors within the last 5 or 10 years.
And it also took massive outside pressure for Braganza to get the boot. Like, it wasn't until the BuzzFeed article
Right.
that DC actually did something. So, like, within the comic book community, for years before the BuzzFeed article came out, we all knew about Braganza. Like, it wasn't even an open secret. It was just open. Like, it's kind of started out as an open secret, and then those last couple of years, people were just writing about it straight up. Everybody knew, and he got like demoted slightly, but then like by, I think that first big Snyder event, the Dark Knight Metal or whatever, like he was editing their big summer event again.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah,
Shame on
and
me. I did not realize that because
and
again,
then
you're right. That was
yeah, and then
wasn't that
that's
after the BuzzFeed article?
that was BuzzFeed came out right in the middle. So like the
Okay.
first half of Metal is Braganza, and then the
Wow.
second half is suddenly gone.
Because yeah, I mean, I again anecdotally from other creators heard about public instances of harassment
Yeah,
that would happen at after hours at a convention and stuff, and right in front of everybody, including a lot of management of DC at the time. So yeah, I understand. Believe me, and also it took a lot of pressure for a lot of these companies to finally go, okay, this person is a bad actor, and it's time for them to go. And I'm glad that again people stood up and were vocal and very right about their story. The you mentioned the story about Charlie Brownstein and Taki Soma. And
mm-hmm.
Taki is a friend of mine, and I've known her for a very long time. You'll forgive me, but I believe the instance with Charlie happened at a con, at a Wizard Con. It wasn't. I mean, you had it as a pro conference of some sort, but as I recall, because again, yeah, I mean, forgive me, man. I just want to.
Yeah, sure.
I'll just point that out. And you're right to actually, regardless, the incident happened. He did when it was fooling in a pool, but he kept throwing her in the pool, and maybe got a little grab assy. I don't know. I really don't know. I wasn't there, but I certainly heard the stories both from Taki and from others who saw it, and it was like, yeah, hey, she's saying quit it, and he kept doing it, and it's like, I mean, good Lord. It's stupid, and that's why the guy is finally out of what it was. It's still it's a shame because the Comic Legal Defense Fund is such a great organization, and it really did put a stain on it. And again, thankfully they've corrected it since.
But like, I mean, they did correct it 2 years ago. Yeah, like it's
a couple. Yeah, it wasn't. Yeah. It wasn't. I mean, with COVID, it's fair to think it was 2 years. I believe it was longer than that. It was pre-COVID.
Yeah. Then. Yeah, there
so
was
like 2018, maybe 2017.
Maybe. Yeah.
I want to say
after. Or I would say 18 or 19. Yeah.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Shame on us and everybody. Again, you'll forgive us breaking into anecdotal without full facts behind us, and I will cop to maybe my facts are slightly off. But again, no, you're right, man. It's but I do think there's an effort to make things better. I do think I know for a fact there are sensitivity editors that are in place at most of the major companies, and they're pretty militant about it. But again, occasional missteps will be made, and it's like, well, how did nobody catch that? And that's disappointing. It is disappointing. But again, I think everybody's learning. I love quoting Kelly Sue. She's a dear friend of mine, Kelly Sue DeConnick. She's like, we're all evolving. We're all, and I think as important of a feminist and an advocate in comics as she is, I think that she is also like, hey, change doesn't happen overnight. You have to make these steps, and I do think that the big two are doing it, and I really do think the other publishers are as well. And not only correcting bad behavior, but also really making a serious effort to make a more inclusive comic book industry.
Yeah, Kelly Sue's the best, and in the book, like I highlight how her Captain Marvel was like a real being a community when there was none, and entirely on her own too, because Marvel was not a lot of help with that. It was all Kelly Sue doing it.
You know
And
what sucks? Go on. No, finish that thought, Tim, and then I'll say about
yeah,
Marvel.
so it's all Kelly Sue like creating this community, and from that we get Captain Marvel, who's now a huge, got her own movie, gonna have more movies. That led to Ms. Marvel, who has this great TV show now and a comic that's been amazing for so long, all because people put in the effort to actually build a community and to reach out to a different set of fans, which
King's
is
Portal. Go ahead. I was just going to say King's Portal points out, why did it take 10 years to make a Black Widow film?
yeah.
I know the answer. I want to hear your answer, and then I'll tell you what I think I know about that.
I think it's Catwoman and Elektra. They had so the Catwoman and Elektra movies in the early 2000s were bad movies, obviously, for not because they were female leads, they're just bad movies. One of them had a
Yeah.
director that had never done anything before. The scripts were rushed, they just didn't work out. And because of that, like, I mean, we have emails from the Sony hack about how we can't make movies with female leads. I think Ike Perlmutter was one of those
Yes.
in the email. So that's a big reason the guy in charge of Marvel didn't want to make movies with female leads.
Absolutely, man. That was the point I was going to make, and you're right
Yeah.
about pointing out the bad films. But yeah, it was Ike Perlmutter. I mean, really, thank God. And for people who don't know, you might also know this. Kevin Feige, thankfully, because of the success of the Marvel movies, was able to go to the head of Disney, Disney Films, I should say, Alan Horn, and say, "Okay, I've made you over at that time, and this was years ago. I've made you over $7 billion or $8 billion at that moment. I don't want to have to answer to this guy anymore."
Yeah.
And Alan Horn said, "You're right. You can do what you want," and he no longer has that voice. And not only did Ike Perlmutter keep us from getting a Black Widow movie earlier, but also was making petty decisions like, well, we don't have rights to the Fantastic Four at the time. Fox was still an independent studio. Let's not have a Fantastic Four book. And we didn't.
Yeah.
And that sucked. And it was like, okay. And then even further, he tried to convince them, well, we shouldn't do the X-Men either because we don't have the movie rights to X-Men. And thankfully, they're like, here's the balance sheet. The X-Men is our biggest seller. We cannot get rid of the X-Men. Well,
the X-Men always sell.
Yes. Yes. And listen, as King's Portal again made a comment, said, shit, read Chris Claremont stuff. And he is not wrong. I mean, again, there's a lot of weird shit going on in the Chris Claremont stuff, the Hellfire Club, at least.
Yeah.
Also he asks, are we watching The Boys? Now, listen, you absolutely acknowledge The Boys. Personally, and I want to hear your thoughts. I'm glad The Boys is as raw as it is. I don't think it's harmful to show what is clearly a very R-rated superhero parody, really lean into stuff that started with Watchmen in terms of questioning the role of superheroes in an imagined society and everything. And I like it because, again, it is raw, it's tough, but I also think there are people like Sunlight that are good actors or good characters in terms of pushing against a lot of these misogynist views. And I want it to be tough and R-rated and even exploitive. I don't mean that in the negative sense, but that again, that it's this parody of. I think the genre is strong enough to handle it. What do you think?
Yeah, I think there's space for all these kinds of things, especially with the massive amounts of superhero media we have. Something like The Boys, like there's nothing wrong with it existing. Obviously, like it's a different take on it. It's not for me. I don't watch it. It's
okay,
just not what I'm into.
That's
but yeah,
cool.
I'm not opposed to it by any means. I read, I think, the first couple volumes of the comics. Superhero critiques for me, I'm just not super interested in. Like Watchmen did it really well, and it's everything since that has kind of been, well, yeah, but it's not Watchmen, is it? Like you're not going to top Alan Moore, so that kind of thing is just personally not my bag. But obviously, superheroes can contain multitudes. We can do all these different genres. We can do all these different tones. It's, again, as I pointed out in the book, that's the problem is we've had such a narrow scope for so long. that now we're broadening it in different ways, great ways in terms of representation and inclusivity, and then in terms of tones as well. So we can have stuff for kids, we can have stuff for adults, we can have stuff that fully embraces the genre, we can have stuff that critiques it. That's great.
Again, and that's fair. You're a comic historian, and you really are laying out the history of comics through this lens. And again, I think comics have to accept the warts along with the successes. So I truly, everybody, I respect that. I think you present a lot of really fair arguments in Not All Supermen in terms of the history. It is what it is. But again, I would point out that I do think things are getting better. What do you think of the CW shows?
I like them. They're corny, but like I like a corny superhero. It works for me.
Sure.
I find the newest one is always going to be the best one. Like they put all the effort into the newest ones. So like right now, Superman and Lois is fantastic. What a good show that is. Love it to bits. And like you can tell the Flash is kind of on its last legs a little bit.
Yeah, where I find fault with the CW shows are, and it's interesting that a show like Superman and Lois is only 15 episodes compared to the others where they're still, those 22 stories. Yeah, man, it's like they don't have enough story to fill what was a traditional network 22 episode season, and we get a lot of crap, unfortunately. And I really was hoping with shows like that and iZombie and some of the other left of center shows that they've come up with. Superman and Lois certainly leans into, I think, the classic stuff in a good way. I love Lois Lane in it. I mean, it is Superman and Lois.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously the kids have their story. Yeah. I mean, good Lord. It's like, finally, we're getting tough investigative journalists and equal partner. Isn't it interesting too? Again, I don't know if you mentioned this in the book, but I know they uncovered that unpublished Superman script from the 40s that Jerry Siegel submitted, where Clark revealed his identity to Lois. And it was like, all right, from now on, we're partners. And it really, like, the assumption is that they were going to almost have a more Nick and Nora Charles for detective fans, that they would really be a team. And sadly, it wasn't used. And certainly, while they were at war, other writers came in and we didn't, or in even later and stuff, it's, it became what it became. But yeah, at least there was an effort by the original creator, Jerry Siegel, to even at least introduce the idea of maybe Lois can be even stronger.
Yeah. Yeah. She's great in the show. The entire show is really well done. And that flashback in the first season to like the Fleischer era suit when Superman first shows up, that stuff's just.
Oh, I'm with you, man. Oh no, 100%, absolutely. No, yeah, I think they're doing good, and I agree with you that I do think the CW shows they continue to improve with each new idea.
Yeah.
So God, even Ed Cato says, "Too bad about Naomi," though. Yeah.
Yeah, and Batwoman too. I was sad that was ended. I think that it really found its footing. I was excited to see where that was going to go, but.
I don't know, man. Listen, I love Kate Kane as reinvented. And I love too that you even acknowledge the original purpose of Kathy Kane back in the 50s to, point out, hey, Batman and Robin aren't gay. They got girlfriends. Don't worry. Everything's fine. Yeah. Again, I get it. It's crazy, man. And it's not crazy. Shame on me. But my good friend, Glenn Weldon, who's done a couple great unauthorized looks at Superman and Batman and stuff, wonderful guy, gay gentleman, and is like, hey man, I dug Robin as a young gay man. And it's like, and you kind of talk about how that was the fear of Frederick Wertham, that children would gay children perhaps would, and again, terrible ideas, but again, this was the shit of society back then, that to think of something like that was unheard of. But I also think, sadly, a father and son could share a bed and nothing salacious is going on.
That he looked at Batman and Robin and saw something other than a father and son. Confounds me. I mean, obviously he had patients that were attracted to Batman or were attracted to Robin or whatever, but like that's a kid looking for representation in a world that doesn't offer any. That's not a statement on the comics. That's about the kid and what they're going through.
Yeah.
And for him to extrapolate it in that direction is, of course,
Yeah, you mean
just
Dr. Wortham, of course,
yeah,
absolutely.
Wortham. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, honestly, and honestly, I was a little surprised when you're like, "Well, he had the best intentions." I'm like, I don't think so. I really think this was kind of that pop psychologist,
the
really
thing.
throwing out. Yeah, please tell me.
Yeah, it's complicated. It always is. Wortham, outside of comics, did a lot of great stuff. Like the LaFar Clinic in Harlem was the first mental health clinic for all of Harlem. Like there were no
Okay,
services for the majority Black community in Harlem until um, Wortham and Hilda Mossy and a couple other people came in and set up this clinic. They were massively important in Brown v. Board of Education. The
wow,
several different cases combined to Brown v. Board of Education, and there was a Delaware case, and they brought a bunch of kids, white and black, from Delaware to the LaFar Clinic and interviewed them, and then Wortham spoke at the trial. Has been described as like magnetic and hypnotic and like influenced the verdict. This was the only trial the NAACP won before Brown v. Board of Education. They lost all the other ones and had to appeal them up. And so then when Brown v. Board of Education eventually went the way it did, it was based to some degree on the work Wortham did. So he's a person who cares deeply about the mental health of children. Just in terms of comics, I think he suffers for not understanding the medium and for getting too hyperbolic with it. There is, in his testimony to the Delaware case, he talks about his approach to mental health in children, and it's not just like a negative based approach. You're not looking for like they're having nightmares or they're acting out. It's we're looking for positive things. He uses the example of if a rose bush is supposed to have 12 blooms and it only has one, that's not good enough. We need to encourage more positivity. And to him, comics were one of the things that were like limiting the rose bush of a children's mind. It's just he presented it so hyperbolically. There are interesting points in Seduction of Innocent in terms of the way people read comics, like say crime comics. If it's 12 pages of crime and murder and then 1 page of resolution, you're gonna remember the 12 pages of crime and murder. Like he had points to make. It's just when it comes to Batman and Robin and homosexuality, Superman as a Nazi was ridiculous, and like his discussion of Wonder Woman as a lesbian is just.
yeah.
I mean, she kind of was if you get into the Martian stuff, but he doesn't talk about that at all. It's just she's a woman with superpowers, so she has to be a lesbian. She's not married. She's not living the life she's supposed to.
Well,
So
and
it's there's
every now and then too, you would have those weird like pinups of like Wonder Woman spanking Etta Candy.
yeah, or like bondage games on Paradise Island.
Right,
So yeah,
right.
there is Wortham had a lot of good intentions, and just the stuff we remember, mainly the Batman stuff, the Wonder Woman stuff, is where he showed how little he knew about comics specifically, and then when sort of the worst instincts of that era kind of came to the fore.
No, I understand, man. Again, I think your book really goes into some very fair directions in terms of pointing out the inadequacies of the various decades. Again, everybody, it's not all Supermen. Sexism, toxic masculinity, the complex history of superheroes. But I do also want to point out these other great books. You did this great Catwoman book as well. Um, you know, I would you say that right now the depiction of Selena Kyle has certainly is doing well and for the better.
Yeah, it's been good. The Jill Jones book was fun. It's Teeny Howard now. She's doing a great job. And then there's Cliff Chang's book, which is amazing. I love that
Yes,
book.
yes.
It's so good.
I've talked to Cliff. I've talked to Joel. I talked to Ram V, who also
Oh
had
yeah,
his
he had a good run in there
one.
too. Yeah,
And yeah, I mean, again, that's the great thing is not only are we just by nature getting more diverse creators, but they're hitting it out of the park. They really are. I mean,
yeah,
everyone you've just mentioned, and
yeah.
really, as
Great
we've
runs.
mentioned, others like Cecil and other great creators, women, men, people of color. It's not a superhero book, but my friend Pornsak Pishat show did The Good Asian
Oh,
about a 1930s Chinese detective in Chinatown, and again takes that trope of Charlie Chan, Mr. Moto, in that, and puts that proper, much more respectable portrayal of a really strong Asian character, and I think it's a wonderful noir that again takes all the good parts of pulp and does it with clearer eyes and better representation.
Yeah.
So absolutely, man. Now are you in Nova Scotia? Where are you located?
Yeah, Halifax, Nova Scotia.
That's cool. How is the store comic community in Nova Scotia? Are there plenty of stores? And
Yeah, we got a few. My main store is Strange Adventures, which has been here for 20 years. It's a great store. But there's a bunch throughout the community. It's a really good comics community. We have a pretty good con here every year, HalCon in the fall. There's a lot of great creators live around here. I'm not sure. I think Steve McNiven might still be here.
Oh,
I think he's close by.
I didn't know he was in Nova Scotia. That's terrific.
Yeah. Brian Lee O'Malley was here for a while. He's a big deal in Hollywood now, but
sure,
he was here for a good while. Who's the guy at Marvel right now? Is it Jed McKay?
Oh, I don't know.
I think it's Jed McKay that's local. Yeah, so we got some local creators that are pretty fun. And like Kate Beaton lives in Cape Breton, so
fun.
That's just northern Nova Scotia.
Sure. So yeah, that's great.
It's a cool community here.
I forget what the name of the comic podcast that's based out of Nova Scotia, but I was on their show and I met them a couple times at a couple New York shows. They were really nice guys that did a great podcast as well. That's cool. Are you gonna hit any North American conventions this year?
We're gonna see. I'm very wary of the outside world.
I get it, man.
The state of things.
Yeah.
So we'll see what comes up. I was just in New York. I wrote the text for a museum exhibit. The City Reliquary Museum in Brooklyn has done a show called Wonder Women, New York City's Heroes of Heterodoxy. That's a kind of history of the women behind Wonder Woman and their connections to New York City. So I was just in New York for that, and that was very fun, but frightening to some extent to be around so many people after 2 years home alone.
Yeah, man, the plane trip alone. I mean, good Lord.
Again. I drove.
Oh, there you That's good.
I'm not messing around, man.
I'm sure your car is very well insulated and stuff. It's a real bubble, I'm sure, inside there.
Yep.
Dude, I so hear you. I'm going to do 2 Chicago conventions and 1 convention in Connecticut at Mohegan Sun, the Native American casino resort, Terrificon, in the next 5 weeks. And yeah, believe me, I'm a little nervous. Even the local shows, and believe me, I'll have my masks with me. And
yeah.
So my tip for everybody for going to conventions: bring more than 1 mask, because likely you'll find yourself in conversation. Last summer, and early fall, I did the Terrificon show, and I also did the Baltimore show. And I would find in conversation that just the condensation of your mouth, the steam would just make the masks wet, and it's like, all right, note to self, like always have literally 4 masks on hand, because you're gonna end up wetting your mask just by talking. And as you can tell from our conversation, I talk a lot, so But no, that's great. And as things get more normal and stuff, I can't again recommend enough not only the new book, but the Lois Lane book, the Betty and Veronica book, which I love. I love what's happening in Archie. I think they're really making a serious effort as well. And I saw those photos on your Twitter feed of the Wonder Woman exhibit that you were just at as well. But here, this Catwoman book again. But really great stuff, Tim. Truly, I'm glad you're out there. I'm glad that you are doing what you do. And all I can say is congratulations on the new book, Not All Supermen. It comes out July 12th. What?
July 15th.
July 15th. Thank you. Yep. Okay. Very cool. And again, the publisher?
Roman and Littlefield.
Roman and Littlefield, everybody. And you can find it now on Amazon or Barnes & Noble's.
All the pages. If you want to buy from your local bookstore, I think you can check on IndieBound and any of those good aggregator websites, or pop by your local bookstore, ask them, they can get it for you.
Attaboy. Are you getting a good response from stores?
Yeah, it's been decent so far. Yeah.
Good. And that's another thing that I would say, and you even anecdotally talk about some of the creators and others that have gone into shops and, especially women and basically, girl in the clubhouse, what the hell is she doing here? That kind of BS. And hell, that's one of the things I love talking about with Kelly Sue. And it's a shame, and that's unfortunate. It certainly isn't everyone, because I know a lot of great examples
For
in
sure.
Chicago and other cities of good stores that really are making an effort to be as inclusive as possible and more than welcome women coming into their store, people of diversity coming in their store, and are very happy to point out, my good friends Art and Franco had a store in suburban Chicago, and you'll forgive me because I know there were male students there as well, but literally it was across the street from a nurse's school, and they would get women and men from that school, like, hey, and the best was I was there, and a woman came in asking for the Kevin Kelly Archie book, and it was like, and they're like, hey, no problem. Like, I heard about this book, and that there's somebody from Riverdale that's gay, and the guy's like, absolutely, and it is a great book. Dan Parent, fantastic
Yep.
Archie artist and writer, and she was thrilled. She was happy as hell to get it, and it was really great to literally see that happen in front of me. So yeah, there are, but I also think, unfortunately, you do have sometimes that mentality of these independent shop owners that are like, nope, girl in the clubhouse, we don't need that. Get out of here.
Yeah.
Leave us alone in our male tights and female fantasies.
Yeah, it's definitely starting to change. My local shop, I mentioned Strange Adventures, probably about a decade ago, they started to do ladies' nights, like specifically to be like, only female staff is working. Come on in, browse around. There's no one going to be checking your superhero cred. There's going to be no quizzes.
Right.
No gatekeeping. Just come in, have fun, check it out. And
Well, and I even know of stores here in Chicago that will have ladies' book clubs, and
yeah,
it's like, yeah, and again, it's like, no, that's great. And the Valkyries, the wonderful organization of women that work in shops and own shops, and their networking that they do, and I think they're a really positive force. I think ALA is doing a great job of making the comic book industry as inclusive as possible. They just had their convention last weekend. So again, I think the glass, if you'll pardon my my visual metaphor, is half full, more than half full. And I do think that it's getting better. I am a bit more optimistic than you are in your final paragraphs, but I have the suspicion that you're with me in terms of things are
yeah,
certainly moving in the right direction.
yeah. Things are definitely getting better. It's remains to be seen if this is permanent or if it's a fad, because we've seen fads before. But
You're
it's
right.
going well, and hopefully it sticks around and continues to move in that direction.
Absolutely. Tim, great talking to you, man. Fantastic conversation. Not all Superman, everybody. The brand new book coming out July 15th. Again, order it at your local store, order it through Amazon or Barnes and Noble, or however you get digital books if you want to read it. It's a tremendous read. And oh my God, I almost became Trump. A lot of people are talking about it. It's a tremendous read. Yeah, but we're saying it in a positive way. So it's no, great talking to you, Tim. Thanks a lot for talking today.
Thanks so much for having me. This is really fun.
And everybody, tomorrow I'm going to have a great conversation in the afternoon on Word Balloon Live with my buddy Ed Cato, who made a few comments today in the chat. And Ed and I are going to be talking about Captain Action, and I'm sure Lady Action will also be represented in the conversation. The great action figure from Mattel back in the day, and Ed is in charge of the Captain Action license. And we're looking back at the Silver Age, a lot of the Captain Action stories that had some of the best and brightest in comic books, writing and drawing the stuff. And just want to get a new update on what's happening in the world of Captain Action. So that's going to be great. Tomorrow afternoon, it's going to be, I got to do my time conversions because he's on the East Coast. I believe 2 p.m. Eastern time, or 2 p.m. my time, 3 p.m. Eastern.